Hello, my name is Brenda Barnett, and I want to talk to you for a few minutes today about why I think Singapore Math is an excellent choice for our homeschool math curriculum. First, I want to tell you about my journey and how I found Singapore Math and how I became such a big fan. I am a homeschooling mom. I have 4 children, and my oldest is currently a freshman in college. He's 18. And then I have 3 daughters who are 16, 14, and 11. I found Singapore Math when my son was going to start kindergarten, and I have used Singapore Math all along the way with each of my 4 children. As I began to look at homeschool curriculum and all of that, I was not concerned about math because actually I have a BS in mathematics from the University of Oklahoma, and then I used that to teach in high schools for 7 years in the state of Texas. Many of those years I actually taught AP Calculus. So math was the least of my concerns as a homeschooling mom, except I wasn't really used to teaching the elementary levels. But what I found was as I went day by day through the Singapore Math curriculum, I was learning something. I was learning a lot about thinking mathematically. Matter of fact, I have one of those moments that you just kind of remember as an important moment in life when you realize something big. I was working with a group of ladies, and I was moderating a marriage discussion. And so I asked the panel people to introduce themselves and tell how long they'd been married. And after they did, I announced to the audience that we had 172 years of marriage experience among the panel members. And the audience just kind of laughed. Many of them knew me well, and they said, "Oh, leave it to Brenda. She would add that up and know. She's a math major. Ha ha, that's pretty funny." And I went along with them, but in my mind I thought, I didn't do that in my head just then because I had a math degree. I did that because I taught my son second grade homeschool math from the Singapore Math curriculum a couple of weeks ago. And I knew in my mind that I was learning something from Singapore Math that I never learned in my math degree and through my studies and even through my teaching of high school level math. And so that began kind of an understanding in my mind that I was doing something different. Singapore Math was a different kind of a program. So as I went on through, I became more and more convinced that Singapore Math really did help me to learn to think mathematically. Now, anytime you consider a curriculum, one really wise thing to do is to, what I would say, begin with the end in mind. So as you consider homeschool curriculums, or maybe you're already using Singapore and just not sure about some of the ways to do it, but as you consider that, let's look for a minute about some of the word problems that Singapore does in the last book. These aren't any particular problems for any specific thing. They're just problems that I found interesting I wanted to share with you today as we talked about this, just to say, look at how Singapore Math teaches us to think. So let me get my screen set up because I'm going to show you on your screen some things about Singapore and some problems and how we would work them. There we go. I think you'll be seeing on your screen, you'll see the word problems on your left and then my little notepad on the right. So again, these are just out of book 6. I think it's out of the word problems. It was 38 and 41. I just cut and pasted them on another page to work with you on them today. But the first one starts out and tells us that there's 3/8 of a guest at a hotel are children. There's 248 more adult guests than children. The ratio of the number of male adult guests to the number of female adult guests was 13:7. How many female adult guests were staying at the hotel? Well, quite possibly that much information might make your head do a little bit of spinning. But let's see if we can break it down, kind of Singapore Math style, and see if we can figure out what it is that it's telling us. Now you notice I'm drawing what we call a bar diagram or a bar graph, and the reason I'm doing that is because many times showing a picture is the biggest key to success in a word problem. So I have given my graph 8 different boxes, and the reason I did that, of course, is because 3/8 is a number I was given as a fraction. A fraction is always a part over a whole. So when they say that 3/8 of the guests are children, that means that 3 parts are kids, and there's 8 parts total. So you start with 8 parts in your graph, and you realize I know that 3 of these represent the number of children in the hotel. Then the next sentence tells me that there's 248 more adult guests than children. Well, if you break it down like that, then you realize, okay, we either have adults or children, and if 3 of them are children, then the other 5 of them must be adult guests. Well, then we have this wonderful realization that if there's more adults than children, we could say these three represent how many children, and these three are the same number of adults. Because remember, with fractions, each of these is 1/8. It's one part of the 8 whole. And so 3 blocks of children and 3 blocks of adults would be the same number. That tells me pretty quickly that if I have 248 more adults than children, that these last 2 blocks must be 248 people. Well, because it's so visual, we could realize that if I divide that in 2 and find 124, that would tell me that each block of these is 124, because again, I've divided my whole into 8 equal parts. So each of these blocks is 124 people. All right? Now, that would tell me that the number of adults would be 124 times 5, or 620 adults are at the hotel. Okay, let's look at the next piece of information. I'm going to go ahead and start on another page, and let's just kind of keep that fact that we just found, that there are 620 adults, and carry that over. Now, I chose that fact because it tells me in the problem the ratio of the number of male adult guests to the number of female adult guests is 13 to 7. So we were working with fractions, now we're working with ratios. And the question that it asks me is, how many female adult guests were staying at the hotel? Now, Singapore Math does a lot with fractions and ratios. Students become extremely comfortable talking in fractions and talking in ratios. And what I find is that many times students in other curriculum are not that. Matter of fact, I teach some SAT prep classes, and sometimes when I teach those, one of the skills that I use is to take a ratio, and we know male to female, and simply by realizing that although they don't talk about the total, I know the total of this ratio would be 20. Because there's 13 groups of male and 7 groups of female, so there's a total of 20 groups. Adding the total is an SAT skill that students in Singapore know long before they get to SAT age, preparing for the SAT exam. So now, in case you're not real familiar with ratios, let's talk about ratios for just a minute. A ratio is just a comparison of numbers. That means if I have 13 male and 7 female, there's 20 total. But if I have 40 total people, then the ratio, the comparison of numbers, is the same. That would mean I'd have double the number of males and double the number of females because I have double the number of total people. And it would be the same if I had triple the number of people. If I had 60 people, then I would know that 21 of them were female and 39 of them are male. A ratio works that way no matter how many you multiply it by. So I pulled this off of the first page. We knew that there are 620 adults total. So if I made a ratio and my total number was 620, that would make it all work. So I think, how do I get 20 to be 620? And I realize that if I multiply 20 times 31, I get 620. Now again, I'm doing some of this without showing all of the work. This is a 6th grade book, and so we're not surprised that it takes a little bit of thought to get to the answers. But 620 divided by 20 is 31. So if I multiply each of these terms by 31, it's going to tell me how many is going to go in each of my terms for my ratio. 7 times 31 is 217, and 13 times 31 is 403. The question asks me how many female adults are in the hotel, and by solving this ratio, I have found that number. Now, this problem is a very easy problem as far as the math that I did. Notice, what calculations did I have to do? Well, I divided 242 by 2 and got 124. I did 124 times 5 to get 620. That's pretty basic math. Dividing by 2, multiplying by 5. And then I had to realize that there's a total number and add 13 and 7. And I even had to divide 620 by 20. I didn't even write that down. But at some point I divided 620 by 20 to get 31. And then I multiply 7 times 31 to get 217. This word problem is not difficult because the math skills involved are hard, The thing that makes it difficult and makes people not sure how to start is because the thinking skills of understanding, truly understanding that 3/8 of a fraction looks like this, that 248 more adult guests is represented by those two boxes, that a ratio can be handled like this, and that you can find the number 217 just by working on a ratio. Let's look at the other problem on this page, also an interesting one. It starts off in a similar way. It says that for the first 3/7 of a journey, Ian traveled at a speed of 90 kilometers per hour. Again, I'm going to start with my boxes that'll help me to see and draw a picture of this. 3, 4, 5 needs 7 boxes. And this divides the journey into 2 groups. It tells us he completed the remaining distance in 10 minutes at a speed that was 18 kilometers per hour slower, and we're trying to find the total distance. So if he went 3/7 of his journey at one speed, basically we're looking at 2 parts to a journey. Part 1 was 3 of the 7 parts, and Part 2 is the remainder, or the last 4 parts of the 7 parts of the journey. Again, notice we have a fraction, and we're drawing it with an understanding of what a fraction means. Each of these parts is 1/7 of the entire journey. What do we know? In the first part of the journey, he went 90 kilometers per hour is his speed. In the second part of the journey, his speed was 18 kilometers per hour slower, so that's 17 kilometers per hour. I'm sorry, 72, of course. 90 minus 18 is 72 kilometers per hour. That's his speed for the second part. We also know it says that he completed the remaining distance. Now that was after the part 1, so the rest of this distance he completed in 10 minutes. And we're trying to find out the total distance that he went. Now notice the total distance is all 7 of these parts. That's what I'm trying to find. Now, sometimes in math, you see something and it jumps out at you as a big red flag. And in Singapore Math, it certainly teaches us that we have to make sure that we notice things. And what jumps out at me in my big red flag here is that I've been given 10 minutes as part of my problem, but when I look at units, the speed was given in kilometers per hour. So that needs to be something that jumps out at every math student, and certainly Singapore Math does a great job of helping us to pay attention to units. So I might ask myself, one thing I know that I can find, there's a lovely math equation that tells me that distance is equal to rate times time. That's something you use a lot and you learn very intuitively in Singapore Math, and you begin to know that equation without having to think about it because we use it a lot. And in fact, that's a mathematical equation that is used a lot in all kinds of math. So we look at this and think, well, how are we going to solve this problem? The distance that he went in the second part of his journey is the rate times the time. His rate was 72 kilometers per hour, and the time that he went, we would have to make that in hours in order to make my units match. Well, a Singapore Math student who's done this very long is going to know that 10 minutes is 1/6 of an hour. Now we can do a conversion equation and talk about 10 minutes, and you can multiply it by 1 hour over 60 minutes. In an earlier math class, they would show you to do this in an earlier Singapore Math level. Again, I jumped in at a grade 6 because I want to begin with the end in mind, and it would show us how to do this, but by 6th grade, this is so intuitive that we don't even write it down anymore, especially when it's as easy as 10 minutes being 1/6 of an hour. But that math would be something that your student would have done a lot by then, and they would know that. So we find the distance. 72 times 1/6 would be 12 kilometers. Now, if we know that there's a distance of 12 kilometers, and that 12 kilometers happened in the second part of the journey, is it dawning on you yet that each of these parts of the journey must be 3 kilometers? Because that 12 kilometers is divided into 4 equal parts. Each of those parts is 3 kilometers. And then notice I do know that these are all the same. These are all 1/7 of the entire journey. So every box up here is a distance of 3 kilometers. So the total distance of the entire journey is simply found by multiplying 3 times 7 and realizing that the person has gone, Ian has traveled a total of 21 kilometers. When we first start this problem, very often in Singapore Math, it looks like I don't have enough information. But when I begin to synthesize the information, put it together and look at it, it becomes clear to me that I do know what I need to do to solve my problems. So, when I look at Singapore Math and the kinds of things that I begin with the end in mind, there we go, sorry. As we begin with the end in mind of Singapore Math, we see that fractions and ratios and speed formulas and conversion equations, those are things in Singapore Math you do so early on and so well that it becomes very simple. Mental math becomes something that you're very comfortable doing. However, for many of us moms, it's not comfortable for us. So as we're trying to figure out how we're going to teach our children to be better than we are, we always want to give our students a better education than we had. And so as I try to figure out how do I do this, sometimes Singapore Math is daunting. Sometimes I've talked to many parents who say, I don't think I'm good enough at math to do Singapore Math. And so as I'm beginning to have more time on my homeschool journey, as I'm beginning to see the benefit that my students had by having such a strong math curriculum, I began to think, how can I help homeschool parents to embrace Singapore Math, to feel confident about it, and to be able to do a good job teaching math to their children by using the Singapore Math curriculum? So what I'm considering doing, what I would like to offer for you to join with me in doing, is to join me with Singapore Math Live, an online math class for parents who are working to teach their children Singapore Math. What I would do is have a 34-week class, or year, 34-week year, that would cover each of the Singapore Math levels. And I would provide you, let's say you have a student in Singapore Math grade 4. I would provide you with a syllabus that would tell you each week how much your child needs to accomplish in each of the Singapore Math books we will be using. Once a week, I will meet you online for probably about an hour for the whole class, and we would talk together about the questions you had from last week. We could talk about the information coming up that you'll be teaching your child this week, and I can give you an idea of how can you say it to your child. What is it that may not be obvious to you that you need to make sure your child understands so that they can do the work well? And then the last thing that we would do is I would provide you with a recording very similar to this one that you would be able to click on and see the word problems worked in detail. I would talk you through just like I talked you through these word problems, and I would show you how to solve them. So if your student is stuck and you need help working a word problem, you can click on a link and have a recording at your fingertips that would help you to work the word problems. Now I can do that with any of the problems that you need, and you can even send an email and ask me to work a word problem and post the recording, and I can do that for any of the problems, word problem or otherwise, that you're having a question about on the homework assignment. So really you have my undivided attention for an hour a week when I can help you and answer questions and give you a heads up about what's coming, and then you also have the availability of seeing a recorded problems worked for anything that stumps you. And I believe that with those helps available that you can teach homeschool, or you can teach Singapore Math as a homeschool parent and feel very well supported, feel like you have access to help, and that you're not going to get stumped and you're not going to ruin your child in math, and they're going to come out of this as a mathematical thinker. I am convinced that Singapore Math is the way to go to produce students who are mathematically solid and ready to go on into the upper level math classes, and the rigors of upper level math are not a challenge when you have a really, really strong foundation. So my passion is to help families to be able to use Singapore Math, but to do it in a way that they feel like they have the support and the confidence that they can do it and do it very well. So I hope that you'll consider joining me with Singapore Math Live, and that it will be something that will be beneficial to your students and will give you the confidence and give them the education that will set them up for success later. Thank you very much.